Hello everybody, today I just wanted to talk about my thoughts on dungeons and dungeons adjustments, nightmare dungeons, etc. So, I overall am a pretty big fan of the nightmare dungeons, and I really don't care for, I guess, the way the meta has shaped out in terms of getting experience. You know, everybody's doing like Runes of Eridu, Iron Hold, and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, like I'll post about that stuff on my channel just for the people that want that kind of stuff, but it's not really typically the kind of stuff that I do. I've actually made, I did nightmare dungeons pretty much all the way to 100 because I kind of found that if you are playing with like one other person, nightmare dungeons can actually be pretty efficient. All we did was we kind of worked out of each other's sigil bag, and we would just kind of look and say, okay, you know, what are the good dungeons for leveling, right? Champion's Demise you can run as a nightmare dungeon. You have Goron Canals, you have Renegade's Retreat, all these things you can run as nightmare dungeons. So we would just kind of look at that stuff and say, oh, okay, that's cool. Let's just run a bunch of those back to back to back, and then you don't actually have to re-travel because all you have to do is go back to your portal that you made, and bam, there you go. It's like that'll do it. That'll get you there. So that's what we did, and we found that was actually pretty efficient. I struggled to even make the whole what everybody else was doing even be more efficient than nightmare dungeons. I don't know if that's because I was just doing something wrong, but I was doing, you know, blind burrows, and I could not outperform what me and my friend were doing in nightmare dungeons. But I think part of that was because we were doing blind burrows, but on nightmare difficulty, because that is a nightmare dungeon, right? So that kind of struck me as weird as to why people were doing so many normal dungeons when it's like, well, you can do blind burrows and all that stuff on nightmare. You just have to, you know, maybe fish for sigils. I guess maybe that was the issue. And there are going to be times when you have to do other things. Like I know there were times when we did like back to back to back cultist refugees just non-stop. And Wudijo has a really good video on like which dungeons are the best for experience and stuff like that, because he has like a whole spreadsheet. I don't know if he made it, if somebody else made it, but yeah, so that kind of helps alleviate that problem. But it does take a little bit more effort. But I don't really care for, you know, people needing to do a normal dungeon to level up over and over again. I think that's like really boring. I think it's just kind of bad game design, so they need to definitely do some adjustments there. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, they only do it because EXP is bad everywhere else. I'm not 100% certain that's true. I don't think EXP in Nightmare Dungeons is that bad. Like I said, I tested it out, and I was outperforming a few of the normal dungeon runs. So I don't know. I don't know if maybe that's because I was going about it in a specific way, but I'm not 100% certain that that's correct. But that being said, this is still what people are doing, and I do think that the Nightmare Dungeon reward at the end needs to be buffed. I think that might be part of the issue, is that people just aren't being incentivized to actually complete the dungeons enough. So maybe they could move some more experience or something towards the end for completing the dungeon, because I think you get plenty of experience for doing like the dungeon in terms of like killing mobs in a nightmare dungeon, but I do think the reward could be a little bit bigger, because I think it's like maybe you get, even at level 100, I was getting like 100,000 experience for the reward on a nightmare dungeon, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, that just seems so low when you think about I need 22 million experience to level up. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against grinding or anything like that, but you know, you compare, it's like, you know, you compare it to the normal dungeons, and it's like, well, you know, maybe this is why people aren't doing it, you know? It's because freaking people just don't want to complete a nightmare dungeon just to get 100,000 EXP at the end. But at the same time, nightmare dungeons also give you a guaranteed legendary. That's actually how I found it. Virtually every single one of my uniques, I found that in a nightmare dungeon. I found Mad Wolf's Glee in a nightmare dungeon. I think the one thing I didn't find in a nightmare dungeon was Temerity. I found that in just doing a random dungeon like this. Uh-oh. I think my inventory's full. Oh no. But yeah, so that's this. Oh. Hello everybody. Today I just wanted to talk about my thoughts on nightmare dungeons and versus doing normal dungeons and kind of the balancing around that. And first off, I'd say that overall I don't really care for the whole, hey, let's run one normal dungeon over and over and over again. I think that's kind of bad game design. You know, you're kind of leaving a lot on the table when everything everybody wants to do is just that one thing. So they probably should buff nightmare dungeons. Now, I know that they said in the developer stream that they are going to be buffing nightmare dungeons, so I'm pretty happy about that. I'm hoping that it's going to be enough, because they also said that they're going to make it to where you can teleport to the nightmare dungeons, and I think that's going to help out a lot as well, because I think a big part of the reason why people don't want to do nightmare dungeons is because they'd actually have to walk to them. Everybody's just caring about like super giga efficiency, stuff like that. Because I don't think that the experience you get from a nightmare dungeon for clearing the dungeon is bad. I think the experience you get for finishing the dungeon is bad. So, because you get a guaranteed legendary, right, which is cool. It's also the way that I farmed all of my, like, well, not all of them, but almost all of them. I think Temerity's the only one I did not get inside of a nightmare dungeon. So, like, there's definitely some upside to doing nightmare dungeons, but the end reward really just isn't good enough, because it's like, okay, you get a legendary and then you get, like, I was getting 100,000 EXP. I just don't feel like that's enough. Like, I feel like it should be more. Like, make it like 300,000 or like 500,000, right? Something like that, because the actual EXP you get in the dungeon killing mobs is good, right? Like, if I went and did like a Renegade's Retreat, I'm gonna get like 1,000,000 experience just for clearing the mobs. But it's like maybe juice up the reward just so it incentivizes them even more to complete it, right? So it's like if you get 1,000,000 EXP from like the dungeon itself, and then you get 500,000 EXP at the end plus a legendary, like, why the heck would people like ever want to do normal dungeons? Like, if you're doing a normal dungeon, then it's probably just because it's a Tree of Whispers or something, and you're just trying to finish off a Tree of Whispers. Like, normal dungeons, in my mind, should only be there as a function of unlocking aspects for the codex, and that is it, right? Once you have that codex, it's like, I don't see why they should really incentivize you to go in there. I think they also need to open up the pool of dungeons that are in the nightmare dungeons. I think they could do way the heck more with that. You know, I don't know why they don't do more with that, but yeah, so, because I think a big part, I think some people are going to like dungeons, right, and they're going to be really sad when their favorite dungeon is not part of the nightmare dungeon pool. So, and because of that, it's going to make them more incentivized to do, you know, normal dungeons, even if it maybe isn't the best, just so they can enjoy the dungeon. So I don't know, I think they should definitely open up the pool of dungeons a little bit more in terms of what they have, because I think that'll help as well too. So I mean, if they buff the rewards at the end and then open up the pool of what is in the nightmare dungeons, I think that would be pretty sweet. And I think that it would make it to where the majority of nightmare dungeons are going to be efficient, because they are making it to where, you know, you can teleport, so even things like Dark Ravine are not going to be that big of a problem anymore. But yeah. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on dungeons. You know, it's kind of what I want to see change, just buff that. So let me know what your thoughts below, guys. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you next time.